Kia ora koutou. We're on Facebook Live now. So a warm welcome to all of our panel members from the ACE Adult Community Education sector for joining us for this panel discussion today, which is all about life in and beyond lockdown. Very timely, I think, now that we're in level 1 and each of us have taken some time to consider the lessons and the experiences that we've learnt from through COVID-19 and how the sector has responded. So to start us, I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. I've asked them to do this in alphabetical order, so this will be interesting. We'll start with the letter A. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora tātou, ko Arapine Walker taku ingoa. I work for the Ataarangi Trust, and we're a national organisation that teaches te reo Māori.
Tēnā koe Arapine. Going over to B.
Kia ora, my name is Bronwyn, and sometimes I'll be using my name Y to answer last rather than second. I'm from literacy Aotearoa, so I know the full range of the alphabet. And I've been working in adult literacy and numeracy and adult community education for a while, but I've got to say this is an absolutely new and slightly terrifying experience for me. So kia ora ACE Aotearoa for the opportunity to learn.
Kia ora Bronwyn, thank you. Heading over to C for Colin.
G'day. Hi, I'm Colin McGregor. I'm the director of ACE Aotearoa, and we are the peak body for the ACE sector in New Zealand.
Thank you, Colin. So after Colin comes, what's the next letter? Going to Linda.
Kia ora, I'm Linda Melrose, the president of the Community Learning Association through schools. And our association's been around for about 20 years, and we grew out of a need for professional development actually at a schools level, and we're delighted to be part of this panel today.
Kia ora Linda, thank you. And Nicola.
Kia ora tātou. I'm Nicola Sutton. I'm the Chief Executive of English Language Partners New Zealand, and we are all about teaching English to former refugees and migrants so they can participate successfully in all aspects of life in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Kia ora Nicola.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Tracey.
Kia ora, I'm Tracey Shepherd. I'm the director of REAP Aotearoa and also the education manager at REAP Wairarapa. REAPs have been around for about 40 years. We celebrated that milestone last year. We work in rural communities all around the country. There's 13 REAPs all up, and we work right across early childhood, schools and community education.
Thank you, Tracey. Thank you to all our panel members for being here today. It is a new experience. I guess this is one of the lessons learnt during lockdown. When we're all locked up at home, we all had to jump online, and so that's been a big focus for not just the ACE sector, but the whole of the country, I believe, particularly in education. Just wanted to check in with you. How are you feeling? Are you all still working from home? Some of you I can see, who's still working at home? I think my office has been rented out now because I'm not there. And so part of our discussion today will be asking you to share what's happened with your respective organisations and where you're located in the sector. So the first question, I'm going to start with the last question. How has the lockdown experience impacted on continuing learning services and connecting with your staff, governance members during and post lockdown? So I'm going to go to Bronwyn to start.
You're loving this, aren't you? Thank you so much, Annalise. I think the biggest thing about lockdown that we really experienced was how it gave us an opportunity to actually connect much more deeply as an organisation. And so in the beginning, we were striving to create the response to teaching and learning and how we would do that. By the end, what we were seeing was that it was much more, and while there were still those aspects, there was much more about being connected as one organisation. So we talk about ourselves now as quite fluent Zoomers. I think we have realised that, and we've kept up a number of the practices. So during lockdown, we did karakia every morning at 9:30, and at least 52, at some stages, many more than that, participants would come on and we'd cover the motu to see how we were. We still do that every Wednesday. We had an update that went out every day to everyone, and part of that was about telling us when we'd have a tutor forum, and we still run the tutor forums every Wednesday. So there are elements to, and we've yet to actually have many face-to-face meetings of anyone. So there are a number of elements to the lockdown that I think are going to continue to happen. And one of those particularly is going to be around online learning and what that means for us as an ACE organisation, and what that means for people who maybe are more remote, and what that means for us in terms of how we could provide opportunities for them to either access via computers, and what are the elements in that we need to think about providing to them in order that they can be part of our learner network. So there's a lot more still, I think, for us to learn from COVID, but it's given us a start and a step into online learning that, while we had done that before at levels 4 and 5, we'd never looked at it in terms of our adult and community education components. And we've found real strength in that for learners and for tutors and challengers, but that's we can talk about that later.
Kia ora, Bronwyn. Arapine, how have you found it?
Kia ora tātou. I guess if I had to sum up in a word for us, it would be whanaungatanga. The importance of relationships over this time, and how some of the things have been positive in terms of the impact on those relationships, and some have been not so positive. So as an organisation like Bronwyn, we realised very quickly that our technology and our way of working had to change very rapidly over this time, and so we were trying to move to an online space with people who had not signed up to teach online, they'd signed up to teach in person. And so it was those relationships that helped get us through that, the relationships that we were able to talk to people about now teaching in a different way, and so on. So it was really that whanaungatanga, having the close relationship with our governance body, who said, do what you have to do, however you have to do it. And our relationship with our learners, with our whānau who were going through their own issues at the time. So I think overall it was the importance of at all times keeping those relationships at the forefront and maintaining those very clear and not only clear communications, but communicating in the way that doesn't aggravate the levels of anxiety and stress that were already in the community. And I think everybody sort of recognised that, and we had a really good role model in the Prime Minister and how she spoke. So it was sort of maintaining those relationships, and it's given us some guidance for the next while about how we can move online. We still very much believe that technology is not a methodology, and our methodology is Te Ataarangi, and that's primarily an in-person, face-to-face methodology. But we now know that there are ways that we could enhance what we currently do through technology and through Zoom and Facebook and other things like that. So, is that a word for whanaungatanga?
Kia ora, heading over to Linda.
Yes, well, both of those, that feedback really resonates with me as a schools person, but I guess schools in their very nature are social places, and so it was a real shock when we went into lockdown for anybody who works in a school, because we're dealing with thousands of people every day, both day school and night school and every other school that we run from the school site. It's in many ways, in many ways, it's also highlighted the differences between the haves and have-nots in New Zealand, you know, and I think we all understand that. And the Ministry of Education has run around and tried to equalise it to some extent, but actually for our adult learners, there are still a lot of adult learners who are not able to be digitally connected, and we became very aware of that very quickly. So we did use the telephone quite a bit. We certainly found that even a few of our tutors, we employ over 100 tutors just at the 2 schools that I work with, and we phoned every single tutor, so that we stayed connected that way. I guess the biggest impact was we wanted to still do something. One of the great things about this lockdown has been everybody has wanted to give. Hasn't it been fantastic? Everybody's wanted to give, and every time I turned around, I was getting an email, you're going to get money back for this, you're going to get that, we're going to give you this for free. So we wanted to roll out a whole lot of online classes free, and within 3 weeks we'd done that. At Onehunga and Aotearoa, we ran about 40 classes online for free, only short courses, and that posed lots of challenges, but actually it was a great thing to do. And one of the things I think that we really learned during this period was we do want to move forward with blended learning, and we need a conversation around how we do that, and how we make sure that everybody has devices. And our learners, I think, I've had some emails today, even learners asking if they could possibly stay online for some of their classes. So I think people embrace the time, to be honest. Most of the learners that we worked with, even though they were challenged and many of them were unsure about what the future held for them, they were really grateful that they had somewhere and somebody to connect with at this time in some way, even if it was just through a telephone call.
Oh, kia ora, Linda, thank you. And nice to hear from the learner's perspective how they've found their experience of being online as well. Moving over to Nicola.
Yeah, so looking at my notes, a word that stands out for the impact on continued learning post-lockdown is new. And what it's done is that the wholesale change that was forced on us through lockdown, what it did was it crammed years and years of what would have been development, piloting, convincing staff to get on board, innovation, working with champions. All of that happened spontaneously without anybody being at all bothered by it or any eyebrows raised or questions asked. And so what it did was it's just catapulted us into this century and made us a lot more capable and responsive as an organisation to what we were already. And we had looked at online learning and decided that it was too great an investment and that it wasn't something that the majority of our learners could engage in because we'd done a little bit of work around it, but clearly we weren't functioning it in a way that was able to be done. And what happened at the time, and one of your questions is about that, but teachers responded spontaneously to the opportunity, and within the first day of lockdown we had classes up and running, and it just, by the end of 3 weeks, we had every centre in the country running classes. But it was new opportunities for learners, and like Linda, we've got some learners saying, you know, this online learning actually works better for my life, it fits around the other things that I'm trying to do, it's nice not to have to go out at night time, all of those sorts of things. So it's working for learners. It's new opportunities for staff, so it's created more opportunities to work and new things for staff to do in terms of PD. It makes them more marketable in the workplace and the marketplace. It's new ways of working as a team. So like many of you, we've moved our meetings online. Our governance board met, they had their normal meeting online a couple of Saturdays ago. So it's given us opportunities to cut costs as well. So costs of travel, costs of staff training, where we would bring staff together, and it involved flying people all around the country and hiring venues and things like that. It means that we can chunk training down into smaller blocks because we don't have to do it because we're all together. Therefore, you've got to make the most of the airfare. Classroom hire charges, you know, we weren't paying for spaces and venues. So it's the opportunity to cut costs, it's the new ways of working for the learners, it's the new opportunities for learners, it's the new ways and opportunities for staff. And I think looking ahead at the impact into the future, we could see a really tough time for former refugee and migrant families. We're already hearing of unemployment and increased stresses, financial stresses and other stresses related to this, increased isolation, some pretty yuck stuff that happens to people. So we can see a really tough time coming, and it's important for us as an organisation to stay up with current community need and to make sure that what we're offering learners, both in our face-to-face classes, which we are also really keen to keep doing, but also the online classes, is just making sure that we're staying relevant to their needs. We've seen a distinctive shift towards job seeking and job supporting courses, where learners are learning about either of those behaviours and what they need to do to be in that place as well. So I have to say we've come out of it feeling really, really positive about the future for learners, for our staff, but also for us as an organisation. I'm really excited. I think this is a fantastic opportunity, and let's hope this is let's hope that COVID, this will be the thing that we all look back on in 10 years' time and go, it was a pivotal turning point for the whole sector, but also for organisations as we grow as well.
Great, thank you, Nicola. Heading over to Tracey.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear the experiences of my colleagues, and I'm also looking at it from an internal perspective. I think our REIT whānau has never been more connected than what it was through the lockdown period. As I'm sure you can appreciate, we're in the far-flung places all around the country, and getting together physically is actually quite challenging for us. But we met virtually every week. When I say virtually, we met via Zoom every week as managers, and had a really good opportunity to talk about what was on top for our REIT and what we were doing in our communities. In terms of that, we're going to continue with that connection. So we have decided that as a manager group, we'll continue to connect on a fortnightly basis. And also our teams that work in the various sectors are also going to continue to connect on a very regular basis. So that's a huge positive for us. We're going to hold our AGM via Zoom, which will be an interesting experience. But I know lots of you have already done that. So I'm quite looking forward to that. And also like you said, Nicola, the cost savings are huge. In terms of innovating and continuing our learning services, yes, many of us did do online learning or provided online learning options, and they were very many and varied. We had lots of digital literacy programs running, lots of te reo Māori programs. We also had a few other really interesting programs like astronomy and cooking and sewing, and how you do that virtually. Yeah, it's a challenge, but we were successful as REITs to do that. Our biggest drawback was connectivity, and it wasn't even so much lack of internet coverage in the areas. It was also lack of appropriate devices in the hands of our learners, and trying to engage in a learning program because you're using your phone as your device can be really challenging. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we cover some of these other questions. But so that was a really interesting thing for us. And as Reapers, we really like being with people. So not being able to be with our learners was a really big challenge. And I dare say that we will take the learnings from the virtual learning opportunities we had, but I will also say that we like being with people as well. So I think we might have a blend in the future. We're not going to go completely online for across all of our learning. There will certainly be a blend, I believe, yeah.
Great, thank you, Tracey. Just before I invite comment from Colin, I just wanted to let our viewers know that these are members of the ACE Sector Strategic Alliance. So they represent national organisations and associations. So Bronwyn with Literacy Aotearoa, Arapine with the Ataarangi, Linda's through schools, providing ACE, Nicola with English language partners, and also Tracey's through rural education activities programs. I'm just going to quickly say, Bronwyn, how many staff, roughly estimated, do you have nationwide?
So nationwide, we have about 401.
401. And
Roughly.
how many learners? What's your learner number?
Normally, we'd have around about 8,500 per year. Normally.
Per year, yeah.
Yep.
Arapine, what's your workforce? How many staff or members of Te Ataarangi nationwide?
Okay, so it's a bit hard. I'm just giving a rough estimate
On the spot,
here, so,
yeah.
so nobody hold me to it. But we sort of operate in two ways. So I represent the national organisation, and we, through this time, have a couple of national contracts that we've had to run. And that's when I'm talking about our teachers and learners, referring to those programs. But we also have rohe right across the country, and those rohe may operate their own programs, which may be funded by government agencies or may be community night classes or day classes that they offer at a koha. So we have that whole range of types of programs that we run. And some of our kaiako might work full time in terms of providing te reo Māori classes in workplaces. So there's that kind of continuum of what we offer. We'd probably have about 100 or so kaiako working. Some might work just a couple of hours a week, some might work full time right across the country, offering those range of programs. And the programs, the contracts that I'm directly responsible for, we have 10 pauako teachers in one and 10 in the other. So that was the 20 that I was most closely connected to over this time in terms of the contracts that we were delivering.
And would you know how many tauira, how many learners? Roughly?
I think we've probably got about a couple of thousand learners across the country.
Yeah, so we're already up to 10K at the moment. Linda, what's your workforce? What's the scale of schools across the country?
Yeah, so there's only 14 directly funded schools, but there are other schools that offer programs, obviously, and schools that work in partnership with other providers. But in terms of employment, there would be between 1,000 and 1,500 people employed in adult and community education through schools, from coordinators to administrators through to tutors. And our learner base is around about 35,000 learners a year.
Wow, thank you. Nicola?
Yeah, we're about 350 paid staff and 1,500 trained volunteer home tutors, and we work with about 7,100 learners a year.
Great, thank you. Yep. Tracey?
Yeah, because we operate across all the education sectors of early childhood schools and adult and community education, I'll give you the figure for total employees by REIPs, but only some of those will be focusing on community education. So there's around about 200 to 230 employees of REIPs around the country. And similar to Te Ataarangi, we have a couple of national contracts and we also have local contracts. So depending on which contract a REIP might have will depend on how many people they actually employ. In terms of ACE, we've got about, we average about 8,000 to 9,000 learners in the ACE sector, and across the early childhood and schools, we engage with nearly 50,000 either learners or educators through those particular activities that we might be offering as well.
Great, thank you. So I just wanted our viewers to understand the scale in terms of not just the question itself of how you have responded to the lockdown, but also the magnitude of what you've had to do around the workforce in ACE in your respective locations, but also the learner reach and the response in relation to that, looking proportionally of what that means for each of you. So thank you. Colin, any comment on response to lockdown?
It's interesting we talk about the haves and the have-nots. The have-nots have not done well with COVID-19. The have-nots are places like Asia where equity, quality and inclusiveness just isn't there, especially for women. So in many Asian countries, they can't even get the cell phone off the bloke's hands. So they can't do learning online because they can't get hold of the cell phone. And places like India, where they got virtually overnight, they had to leave town and go back to their little villages because lockdown came in without any warning. In places in the Arab states, there's been a whole lot of loss of jobs. Women have had to stay at home, and they're really worried now about workers' rights. So what's going to happen post-COVID in terms of the amount of jobs available, the conditions in the jobs, and how much people are going to be paid? South Africa, you've got poverty, you've got inequality, and you've got violence. So in COVID, that's just been made worse, except in some places like Cape Town, they've been able to establish community action networks where they've supported each other and done some online learning. So that's the kind of have-nots. So it has not been a good experience for them. The haves at places like Scotland and Ireland, especially Ireland's done very well. Their Zoom take-up was about 10 times post-COVID than it was before COVID. Lots of free online courses, lots of support from government. Scotland, not quite as good. Their NGOs have lost around about $60,000 in terms of their income, and about 800 learners have missed out. So they have not translated as well as we have to Zoom and online courses. So it's very dramatically around the world.
Thank you, Colin. I think some of the issues that you've raised that's been highlighted globally have also been things that have been highlighted through COVID in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So, and I'm sure some of these will come up through the next questions. So speaking of, moving on to the next question, going to go to what were the challenges and barriers to operating in a digital space? And we'll start with Bronwyn.
I know that was a joke to think that you should always start with B, but truly, there will come another time in your life.
Next panel.
So feel free to share this around. I think the challenges. So we started to notice, the impact of COVID-19 before lockdown, and we noticed that there were people who were getting worried about their health, and that could include both tutors and learners. We had one of our tutors tested positive, and then we had one of our learners go for tests, and eventually we found out that they were negative. But those kind of sent ripples around of concern for us, and even though there's the organisation is large, as you've noticed, and from Kotai to Invercargill, it's still we still noticed even prior to, probably about 2 weeks prior to the lockdown, that we were starting to have a big drop off on numbers wanting to come face to face. So I guess there was an aspect that we were already wondering what COVID-19 was going to start to look like. And when it came into lockdown, so we had that small amount of time before to get organised. A number of tutors grabbed the workbooks and they just delivered them. So they delivered out to their learners and started that whole process then. I think, I'll put my glasses. I think thinking about some of the aspects of barriers and challenges, one was about who had computers, who didn't have computers. And I'd been in a different place to prior to it, and I'd watched organisations that I was working with, a group of people with just buying in computers, and I talked to Sue West, and she was accessing computers from overseas, and I was conscious that we weren't going to be able to respond like that in this kind of very quick way to technology. So I think the first challenge was really contemplating how we could manage our resources effectively and efficiently, knowing that we were going to have some aspects of lack, you know. I think another aspect to the challenges and the barriers was considering that shift of tutors from being face-to-face, where the relationships is absolutely key, and the trust is absolutely key, and moving that process into one that's going to be either online or, I think, like Tracey said, you know, maybe a 5-minute phone call. That was also something that we were really trying to support as much as we could. But a little bit like Nicola mentioned, you know, it was really in the hands of a lot of tutors to do the very best that they could with their learners. I think the aspects of how we would teach, so there were questions about whether we would use Teams, Microsoft Teams, whether we'd use Zoom or whether we'd use Google. We took a kind of bold step to think about how we could systemize some processes in the process. So while I know others just went for gold and went everywhere, we decided to think about positioning ourselves post-COVID. So we were looking at either we would teach via Zoom, because it's an organisational platform that we want to continue to promote, or via Microsoft Teams, which is because we've got 365. And then also we wanted to see what we could do in terms of utilising our Microsoft 365 phone system as well, which actually wasn't so good, but at least some of our people tried that as well. So that was another challenge and barrier. How do we keep in touch? And how do we do that, thinking about that this can provide value for us going into the future. I think we had challenges about organisational capability, and that wasn't just in terms of access and equipment. It was also about what skills we had. And so we may access the ones that Aotearoa was providing. We may have accessed the ones that Aotearoa provided, and we also accessed MindLab. And that was, you know, so there were those opportunities. But the other thing we did was we started to run our own programs for tutors as well, where we got much deeper and quicker into how you utilise some of our own technology and our own platforms. So I think thinking about some of those challenges, it was for us trying to find the biggest aspects, like I say, that could put us in a safer place beyond COVID-19, because we didn't, I mean, you know, none of us knew how long we were going to be there. And we didn't want it to be scary, but we also knew that there were going to be elements of real mental anxiety too. So we did a lot of talking to other organisations, and we pinched the idea from both North Tech, one of our kind of collegial polytechnics, and some of the work that ELPNZ was doing around how do we keep an update and a mental wellbeing update every day. We brought in employee assisted programs for people. We tried to find a range of ways that we could do that. Yeah, I guess that's it for now. Actually, no, I want to read a quote from one of the learners. So one of the challenges for this particular learner was, "It's okay, but sometimes it's frustrating because I only have a cell phone. I miss interacting with my classmates, but at least I can see them online. I'm more independent now, I guess, and I can source the information I need online. It's good that I can do a class while sitting in my living room." And so, you know, for every challenge and every barrier, I think what's really important for us to always be conscious of is that there were lots of positives, and there were lots of moments where we could see real human fortitude, and there were times we needed to remind ourselves to be kind to ourselves as much as to each other. Yeah, and I think the last challenge I'll say is that link in connectivity. Right in the middle of a really good meeting, really doing something awesome, really good program, someone's teaching somebody something, you're just loving it, and then your Wi-Fi gives up.
Yes, we've made mention of that in our PD workshops about being online and everybody else being online, especially when my dogs start barking.
Yeah.
Arapine, challenges, barriers.
Challenges, same, similar to the issues that Bronwyn's raised, was the challenge of what technology are you now going to use? From doing nothing online to now having to do things online. What technology? And so we worked with I didn't want to quickly jump into online teaching because the programs that we were delivering nationally are to whānau, and they're whānau in low decile kura kaupapa Māori, and we also deal with, got to have a national contract with Te Kohanga National Trust to deliver to some of their staff and whānau. So we were very conscious that we didn't want to quickly put something else on whānau who were already having to, to kind of work through the issues of now having your children at home. As myself, actually, I had two children at home, school-age children at home during that whole time as well. So we were very conscious of our whānau and being part of that kind of ecosystem. So it's not just us, but it's the whānau that we're dealing with. It's the kura that they were at, or the kohanga. It's what was going on with the teachers of kura and kohanga. So we had to make sure that what we did was aligned with all of those other systems as well, and that we weren't kind of trying to operate outside of or contrary to something else. So that's why I'm talking about the importance of relationships. So that was my role, to manage those other relationships with your institutions and the national bodies to ensure that we were doing things the way that they were. So I guess for me, through the whole thing, it was we have this amazing whakatauki, and it's never held so much meaning for me as it has over this time. And our whakatauki of Ataarangi is kia ngākau mahaki, which means to be compassionate and to have aroha for people. So I would remind myself of that every day because some of the challenges were around the internal challenges for us as an organisation, and then managing the external relationships as well. Like Bronwyn, we had to go through a period of looking at what are we going to do, if we're going to go online, how are we going to do that, what technology are we going to use, how are we going to manage the professional development for our teachers who previously had no experience in online teaching, how are we going to manage that? So we had to source some online training for them. We had to source the technology that we had to agree on a technology that we would use, once we had looked at what was around. And then we had another issue that our kaiako raised when they said, we are a bit uncomfortable about doing Ataarangi online in a open access world. We don't necessarily think that it's a good thing to have Ataarangi open and open access to in terms of the fact that it could be taken out of context. So when we're looking at new technology to provide online learning, that was another issue that we had to contend with. How can we do this in a way that's not going to make our kaiako feel uncomfortable? So in the end, we chose Zoom because the kaiako, the teacher can operate the Zoom, and so that it's the teacher that can decide that it's not going to be recorded. The teacher can talk to the students and say, we prefer that you didn't share this. So that was one of the reasons why we had Zoom, and also because it's free. Let's be honest, it was free, for a certain time period. So what we were able to do is get our kaiako to work in teams. So one kaiako had the license and would run the longer period teaching. So the other, we didn't have to get licenses for every single one. We managed it that way. And the other thing we suggested that teachers use was Seesaw for the same reasons, that it's similar to Facebook, but it's not open. So you can have be sharing things with each student. That means that it's not in an open space, and so they could be sharing stuff back with you that not everybody else in the class sees. So we looked at things like that. Externally, it was about those challenges that were happening for whānau and schools. we had to work closely with kura in terms of what was going to be, because our classes were previously held at kura. So once kura were deciding to go into lockdown, that was it. We could not have in-person classes anymore. And managing those kinds of issues for our kaiako, and trying to, just as Bronwyn said, trying to let that innovation happen, in an organic way. So, for example, we had one kaiako that just decided, she ran into, I think it was, I can't remember which, it was probably good if I don't say which shop. She ran into the shop just before lockdown, bought every single coloured sticks that they had, the rakos, put them into bags and delivered them to each of her whānau, so that they would have something to do, something to look at over the lockdown. So it's allowing, trusting in your people that they know how to communicate best and operate best with their learners. That was important for me. That was important learning, and that was one of the challenges in terms of trusting in people to be able to do that to a greater level than we had before. Yep, I think that's it. Thank you.
Kia ora, Arapine. Nice to hear that your kaiako got a bit creative, but like delivering the food parcels during lockdown, you were delivering poison air rods to whānau. Linda.
Yeah, I feel I'm in fear of repeating everything that's already been said, but there are a few things that raised themselves during this time, and I guess in terms of an organisation, most of us within the organisation had used a Zoom platform or a Google Classroom or something like that. So for us as an organisation, that wasn't difficult, but certainly as soon as lockdown came along and we tried to, and tutors with all their goodwill were so keen to be involved and wanted to do things, that's where the problem was, because for us it wasn't business as usual. We actually wanted to give something back, and we wanted to look at how we could, the programs that we wanted to run. It wasn't to try to explain to a tutor who's continuously run an ESOL program that this is not the ESOL program that you run at school. So there was an enormous amount of work that went in the background, just trying to upskill tutors around how this was different and why we didn't want them to just roll out the beginners ESOL class or G'day Mate class, and giving them the resources and the confidence to be able to do that. And of course, we wanted to roll out short courses because it was a feeler for us. So, one of the challenges was keeping everybody engaged early on. All the tutors at different levels, and some of them were confident and some weren't confident. So little things like that you don't think about, but I had one tutor that found it offensive if somebody didn't have their camera on. Different expectations between the learners and the tutors online. Very challenging at times. The quality control thing, one of the things that we did do was within our school was, or our adult classes, I went on to a lot of classes and just sat in for the first session or two sessions. I was asked to by some tutors. Other tutors I asked if it was okay if I came online. Actually, I was just blown away. The way that everybody sort of rose to the occasion. Big shout out to Zoom here, because they very quickly took off the requirement to have a time frame, and they allowed Zoom meetings, because that was a barrier to begin with. How are we going to run a Zoom meeting in half an hour, and trying to explain to them, you come off and you go back on, and, just a whole different way of delivering learning and learning. So the quality control thing, that was interesting, but I think we sort of got our heads around it. And I by the end, I certainly felt very confident that what was being delivered online was valuable and appreciated. And that's about it, really.
Thank you, Linda. Nicola.
So, I mean, like others, device or access to devices was one of the barriers. Sometimes it was that competition between kids' needs and parents' needs. So where children were in the home, it was about who had access to those devices. No or patchy internet connection for some of our learners, and for some learners it was no prior experience with technology really. But what we noticed was how much families came in around learners to support their mums and dads to get online. You know, we've got one really lovely story of a couple of former refugee men in their 70s who took about 3 weeks before they managed to get online, but became the most regular attenders in their class, which was held pretty much every day. And for one of them, he sent his homework back via email, first ever email he'd sent in his lifetime. So, you know, some positives in response to the barriers, but we had thought these learners are never going to get online. One of the other barriers was the language barrier. So obviously when you're teaching English as a second language, that language barrier in terms of getting learners engaged to start with, but also using the tools. And one of our teachers overcame that, and we shared that around, and other teachers picked up on it as well, is that when a new learner came into the class, the other learners ran the introduction to Zoom session with that learner, and it was part of their teaching and learning experience to teach the new learner how to use the different features on the tool. We had a few learners concerned about Zoom security. So you might remember partway through there was sort of that media coverage around Zoom and security, and we have some learners that are really sensitive to security and being monitored and things. And so that was a bit of a challenge for some of our learners who chose to withdraw from classes because of that issue. And there was a little bit around some staff not having either the technology or the capacity, but what we did was re-engage them into supporting learners who couldn't also engage online via the phone. And so there was quite a lot of mailing out of resource materials, follow-up phone calls. There was very regular contact with learners that couldn't join in. So we had, at the start of the lockdown, the Tertiary Education Commission had come out and asked what percentage of our learners did we think were going to be able to engage online, and I had gone back with 15 to 20%, thinking if we get 20% I'll be absolutely delighted. But we had about 53% of our learners engaged. Far more learners got engaged online than I ever thought, and we had not anticipated that very low level learners who are not literate in their own language and also have very limited English. We didn't expect any of them to be online, but they were just there, boots and all, with family support and with a lot of phone calls with teachers getting them online and sorted out. So in the 9 weeks that we were in lockdown, we had over 60,000 hours of learning attended by our learners. We had, that was through 318 groups, and I think it was 2,063 learners, individual learners were engaged in programs. So we just had an absolutely massive response to it, which was unexpected. So while there were definitely challenges and barriers, so 40% of our learners weren't engaging in an online class, but they were regularly phoned by the staff who were able to do that. They were supported with learning materials as well. And we've got some lovely stories of home tutoring relationships in particular, where we've got photos of learners out at letterboxes picking up the package that the home tutor had dropped into the letterbox a day or two earlier, and one where a learner had lost their internet connection because they hadn't paid the bill and they couldn't figure out how to get it back, and the home tutor working with that provider and with that family to get their internet back and get that bill paid. And so it came down to the learner putting the cash in the letterbox and then the tutor picking it up and paying the bill. It was just, this really lovely relationship stuff that happens. And I think Arapine talked about people just being really kind and looking after each other, and we saw that as well. So I'd see that as being one of the successes that helped overcome the barriers. So it was the kindness of the tutors, but also the kindness of families towards each other as well. We I think one of the reasons we had such success was we allowed our tutors to have full autonomy. In fact, we couldn't have stopped it. They were just so keen to get going. And so we had a really large number of tools being used. So we had things like WeChat, which is, you know, an equivalent of a Chinese Facebook sort of type thing. But we had Zoom and Google Classroom, and we had Teams and WhatsApp and Kakao Talk and all sorts of things being used by tutors and learners, and some of it was driven by learners, so learners being really comfortable in WeChat and tutors just getting on board with that and using a combination of WeChat and Zoom and other things as well. So you know, there was there would have been a lot more challenge and barrier, I think, if we tried to cramp down on that. We look forward to supporting one or two learning platforms and becoming experts in that coming out the other side, but certainly that was one of the responses that I think helped overcome the barrier of access, was being really open to what learners wanted and were comfortable with, and what tutors wanted to do and were comfortable with as well.
Kia ora, Nicola, thank you. Tracey?
Yeah, I'm not going to cover off everything that my colleagues have already touched on, but a couple of things for us were about whether or not our tutors were comfortable teaching in that environment, and that it became really evident pretty quickly that you can't just pick up your program and chuck it online, and so that really did impact on what REIPs were able to offer. But I will tell a story about security, and I think one of my colleagues did mention that, and it became really evident really quickly that you have to control the entry into some online learning options. We had an example where a REIP was running a Waiata program, and partway through the program, it was a multi-week program, and partway through that program we had a group of university students who were clearly really enjoying their lockdown period with a few drinks, and they joined our Waiata program, and yeah, it was quite disruptive actually for our learners, but it just really nailed home the message that you have to actually really manage that entry and access into various online learning platforms. And the other thing that we learned very quickly was when everyone's trying to sing on a Waiata program, it doesn't necessarily work. So yeah, muting your microphone was a really big thing that we all learned very, very quickly. So yeah, and I just want to tautoko what everyone else has already said.
Kia ora, Tracey, thank you. Colin, anything to add? Challenges, barriers?
Yeah, just three things. First of all, if you're a poor country and you have not, you don't have the Wi-Fi and you don't have the devices, so you don't even get past square one. If you're a richer country, just picking up on what Tracey says, you don't have, quite often, you need the capacity of the teachers and facilitators built up, and also the learning methodology. So it's the same thing that we've talked about here. You just can't pick up a program and put it online. Ain't gonna work.
Thank you. So I'm going to start to close our discussion on the subject. I think each of you have given us some real insight to the reach that you have, the challenges that you had, the responses and solutions that you've embraced, especially about being online, and really nice to hear from each of you about how your tutors have responded to the situation, how your learners have responded, and seeing some of the recurring things around manaakitanga, around whanaungatanga is a values-based approach that I think really characterises what each of you epitomise within the education sector. Those are things that you already had before lockdown, pre-COVID, as an underpinning philosophy, and I think it was probably a saving grace as we went into lockdown, but with the other challenges around connectivity and staying in touch with each other. So just this is a quick fire round from each of you. From the lessons learnt, what do you think you will continue to do as we move to what they are saying is our new normal? We'll go from Bronwyn, because this is my last chance to make you start first. What will you keep doing?
I think I've finally relaxed into the process. Like I'm relaxing finally into it. Hey, right, thank you for the teaching, Annalise. It won't be quick fire because I'm relaxed now. I think I want to say that one of the things that we did as well was we took an opportunity to actually review all of our programs, And so we had working groups. So where tutors didn't necessarily have learners, people were redeployed into doing other activities and tidying up, fixing up, refreshing some of our programs. And while we're still completing those, you know, the fact that we were able to do that was a gift. It was a real gift. I think another thing we did was in karakia, we took time every day to actually learn a new kupu, a new phrase in Te Reo Māori. So now everybody is saying throughout the organisation, kia pai tō rā, or kia pai o koutou rā, and that's just the way people finished the kōrero that we had. You know, we've been trying to do that for years, and we got it done within COVID. People are learning the greetings in Pasifika, so we've learnt a range of taloni, talofa lava, talofa. So we've been learning about how we would greet each other, and Manongi's been taking us through some of the aspects of Pacifica culture. I think, I can't even remember your question now, I'm that relaxed.
What will you keep doing?
But I think
it takes an hour to settle in.
I think there's actually quite a lot that we're going to, like I said before, you know, we're carrying on with karakia. We're carrying on with Tutor Forum. Tutor Forum is now much more about teaching and learning engagement and ideas about and sharing across the country. So we're getting tutors in to share concepts and to feed into next developments. We finished a restructure during COVID, which was throughout the organisation, just the last moments of the transition from being an incorporated society into a trust. So we started to do induction as well, just in the last couple of weeks. And we've tackled aspects in that you know, the history of literacy, Aotearoa being treaty-based. We're doing the Te Kete Mauri Ora, the quality assurance induction online for about 60 people next week, and that all take place via online. So our confidence to actually engage meaningfully and not superficially, and to stay engaged in that process has become something that I hope anyway will just be a feature of literacy Aotearoa. Like Nicola, you know, our board meets via Zoom, and our meetings tend to be very focused. And while they were already focused, I think there's a different intensity to the conversation than we had before, and that, you know, that's really helpful. I think I'm just trying to see if there's anything else I need to add from other aspects. I think probably the last thing is going forward is that we have a real appreciation that we've still got so much more to be in our transition. I mean, we have come from being 35 organisations to being a national organisation, you know, and the shift and the change of us in terms of the personnel, the systems that you need to run such a now quite a big organisation has really been emphasised, I think, in COVID. And so I think the things that I hope we continue as we move on, yes, the whanaungatanga, yes, the connectedness, yes, the innovation, yes, the concepts of systemic and systematic change and improvement, but also the concepts of humility. You know, I think that's been a really, really big, certainly for me. I think I have, sorry, it's get a little bit thing. I have been really humbled by all the different emotions that we've experienced as an organisation. It hasn't been easy. I think there's been real hardness in what we've had to deal with. And then there's been hearing every day how people have been laid off and recognising the realities of people's lives. And so then this last bit is kind of thinking about what can we do in the future to assist in the process of people in Aotearoa healing. You know, an experience that we know as Māori and Pasifika is that when the unemployment rates grow, they grow disproportionately for us in a way that's larger and more impactful. And so what do we do as Literacy Aotearoa to be there for them in a way that we can afford, because we all work to tight budgets, and you know, there isn't that freedom to just do everything. So I think the last part of that is becoming smarter, you know, and ensuring that we approach everything with the consciousness that we can and must do better, that we are interdependent of each other, whether it be as a human, whether it be as an organisation, or whether it be as a peer in an organisation, with learners and with their whānau, and that we're interconnected, and that we need to keep all of that in mind. And so I'm sorry it wasn't quick fire, but it's my protocol.
Summary of our kōrero today on the live panel. I'm going to ask Nicola, who has prepared, or wants to share something quite special.
Something that was just absolutely heartwarming was a group of learners in our Dunedin Centre who are from former refugee backgrounds, and many of them are pre-literate. They've not had the opportunity to go to school and learn in their own language, and are now learning English, but also learning to read and write, and all of the other things that go along with it. And it was their teacher's birthday, and between them they pulled together a little birthday video where they wrote the letters of her name to make a long line, and it was put together obviously with the help of family and friends, as well, as you'll see as you watch it. But it was just so delightful, and I think it sums up really nicely the fantastic positives of this, both from a learner and a teacher perspective, and what amazing people we have the opportunity to work with in the adult and community education sector, not only those that are learning, but also those that are teaching and learning from the learners that they work with. So what a privilege, and I think this sums it up really nicely.
Also want to acknowledge Tracey, who had to jump out. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Nicola. And thank you to all of you for your time today, and then sharing your experiences of being in lockdown, and also lessons learned that all of us can learn from as we move into normalising whatever the future looks like for all of us and for the adult community education sector. On that note, we're out. Ka kite.
Ka kite.
Have a good weekend.